Good afternoon. My name is Tarika Peaks, and I am the Executive Director of Operational Planning. And today I will explain the redistricting process for Fulton County Schools. In 2017, the board instituted a policy to fully engage the community in the redistricting process. The policy states that anytime we have not rezoned a school or a community within 3 years, we are to conduct a redistricting one-on-one session. For the next few minutes, I will talk to you about the purpose of redistricting schools. We will review the policy for school attendance zones and look at some of the data elements and the requirements that are part of this process. We'll also go through the community engagement procedures where community members like yourself can have a voice in this process. Also, I will provide important dates and informative redistricting resources. What is redistricting? Those two terms are often used interchangeably. They mean the same. Every residential address in our district is assigned to an elementary, middle, and high school. The process of redistricting is changing that assignment for various reasons. We look at what your current boundary is and assess whether or not we need to assign you to another school. It could be elementary, middle, or it could be high school, and potentially could be at all three levels: elementary, middle, and high school. Redistricting is simply the process of changing attendance boundaries. When does the redistricting take place? There are 4 instances in which the board will contemplate a redistricting. Typically, redistricting takes place when additional capacity is added to the district. Such instances include a new school opening or if major renovations or additions to a school are completed. Also, when a school closure or consolidation is under consideration. Redistricting is also an option when there is an imbalance in enrollment. This fall's redistricting is based on the replacement of the Conley Hills Elementary School and the potential closure of Park Lane Elementary School and Spalding Drive Elementary School. In March of every year, enrollment projections are presented to the board. And in those projections, we also include capacity, which is how many seats or classrooms we have or need within a school attendance boundary. That information is presented to the board, and when there is a sizable imbalance, we will recommend to the board that a redistricting is needed. If the board agrees, they will ask staff to start the redistricting process and to fully engage the community during the process. In most cases, the scope of the redistricting is very broad to ensure all available options are covered. We do not offer maps at the beginning of the redistricting process. We first ask the community a series of questions, and based on the feedback we receive, we develop attendance zone maps. We invite parents and community stakeholders to participate in the process to ensure we have included everyone who could be potentially impacted. The school attendance zone policy was passed in September of 2000. Before 2000, principals would appoint a representative for each school to sit on a committee and develop the attendance boundaries. And after the board went through a redistricting in 1999, they wanted to give everyone in the community an equal voice. As a result, they established the procedures for revising school attendance zones to include how we would consider attendance boundary changes, the primary and secondary criteria, and procedures that would allow community to be a part of this process. We've used this process in the planning and opening of 40+ new and replacement schools, and since that time, in the past 23 years and 4 school closures. Primary criteria have been identified as geographical proximity, the distance traveled using available transportation routes, projected enrollment, the number of students assigned to a school, including future projected enrollment and capacity of the building, the number of students who can be accommodated at the school, taking into account the number of classrooms and rooms needed. Please keep in mind that students are not always assigned to their closest school, and all 3 criteria must be considered. Secondary criteria are used when primary criteria offer more than one option. These factors include considerations for traffic patterns, available routes to and from school, and how frequently neighborhoods have been rezoned. Typically, we try not to move a community more than once in 3 years. We want to ensure that students are not shifted multiple times in their tenure in a school. We also consider school feeder alignment with the intent to keep as many students together as possible as they transition from grade levels, as well as balancing special programs such as TAG, ESOL, and special needs. How do we quantify and measure the criteria? We use a tool called Geographic Information Systems, short acronym of GIS, to quantify and measure the criteria that we use. GIS is very similar to the same technology you would use when you're looking for a restaurant on Waze or Google Maps. It's a product licensed by Davis Demographics and Planning, and it sits on a platform called Esri. Esri is like a Microsoft of GIS. An example of GIS you may be familiar with is a map produced by the Centers for Disease Control showing any type of health-related information, such as a concentration of COVID-19 cases. It's a way of visually displaying data. Our redistricting tool is called School Site Pro. It's a GIS-based tool that allows mapping and data analysis for school planning. With this tool, we have the power to not only develop enrollment projections, but also shift attendance boundaries. It's a cohort-based model that means when it develops enrollment projections and forecasts for the coming year, it starts with the base of the existing year. So today's first graders become next year's second graders. It progresses the students through and it explicitly consider other factors that may impact the population, such as new residential development, private school enrollment, and any type of attrition or change that a school may see are included in our student mobility rates. Birth rates, which is data we collect from the state, allow us to predict what our kindergarten population should be in the future years. Geographic proximity is based on our neighborhood groupings. So the picture that you're seeing is a demonstration of what we call study areas. Study areas are neighborhood groupings of communities that are used to create attendance boundaries. There are hundreds of data elements that are included, such as the student forecast, what residential development is there, mobility factors, and birth rates for each study area. We're able to calculate existing and future student populations using all those data elements that I previously mentioned. When we begin the process of determining geographic proximity, we find the geographic center of every single study area, and we determine the street network distance to your first, second, and third closest school and route. We assign that study area in elementary, middle, and high school for all three variations. As you can see, the lines are indications of what a route would look like for each unique study area to a school site. We map a geocode every single student in the district to their residential address. We also have a way to capture every student. As an example, if your student is on a hardship or a magnet student, they are attending a program based on an IEP, we have a way to matriculate and calculate the student based on where the student attends school, not where the student lives. It's important for us to know where the student may show up in the future based on where the student's school versus their residence. As I mentioned, within the study areas, we have all our student population geocoded down to their residential address. Our forecasting methodology starts with existing student data and is focused on how many students we have today and how many students we will have in the future. We begin with our geocode and we take into consideration other things such as pre-K classes and out-of-zone students. Those are our hardship and magnet students. We want to include those students in our forecast as well as our charter schools. Some of our charter schools begin at kindergarten and they sunset at 8th grade. We want to ensure that we calculate whether those students will return to our high schools. Our mobility factors include the variations of those students coming in and out of the district. We also have residential development. We work with our municipal planning agents to track residential development from rezoning through construction. We utilize a third-party vendor to provide sales data, so we're able to look at not just where homes are built, but also where they're being sold. Also, we're able to look at quarterly closings and determine where future students will come from. Geocoded students determine how many elementary, middle, and high school students are generated from new or existing developments to predict future developments. We also look at historical data, things such as our regional data model. It tells us by grade band what our mobility and attrition across the district is for the region. The preliminary forecast determines how many students we anticipate, not just for next school year, but for 5 to 7 years in the future. It includes such factors as birth factors, which help us, again, predict our kindergarten population, mobility, the in and out migration of students entering the district from private school, and compulsory age of attendance, and students who enter Fulton County at sixth grade, where the age rule is no longer applicable. You may ask, how accurate are the enrollment projections? Before COVID-19, we have been very accurate in our enrollment projections. You can see our standard is plus or minus 1% across the district. We have hit that target almost every year except for the 2 years impacted by COVID-19. That's the 2020 and 2021 school year. The 2023-24 forecast accuracy was impacted by several factors. The most notable factors are the almost 800 RISE charter students who are projected to return to their zone school due to its anticipated closure. RISE charter did not close, resulting in many of those students returning to RISE. Smaller kindergarten classes, shrinking elementary and high school cohorts, and smaller incoming cohort classes. Our second primary criteria is school capacity. School capacity is based on classroom space at the elementary and middle school level. We look at the number of classrooms within each building. We also take in consideration what are the instructional needs of the students. We look at how many students will be in the building, not just today, but in the future, and the special programs such as TAG, ESOL, special education, and remedial education within each building. To give you an example of how this works, let's review the classroom allocation model for Dunwoody Springs Elementary School. This is old data, not today's data. Dunwoody Springs projected enrollment is 563 students. Based on the board-approved student-to-teacher ratio for grades K through 5, the school needs 23 general education classrooms. Those numbers are highlighted in the first yellow box. Next, we consider specialized instructional needs like TAG, ESOL, special education, pre-K, and EIP, which requires additional instructional spaces at a reduced class size. Some of these programs share classrooms, but they are still factored into the model requiring classroom space. 19 for this example, and it is highlighted in the second yellow box. Finally, we allocate each elementary school 8 constants, which are spaces like your art labs, music classrooms, your computer science, and your teacher planning area. When we add the 23 general education classrooms, the 19 instructional program classes, and the 8 constants, Dunwoody Springs need a total of 50 classrooms for 563 students. The building has 55 classrooms available, which leaves 5 empty spaces. Using state capacity, however, this school would appear to have 287 available seats. Our neighborhood study areas are those puzzle pieces and building blocks of our attendance boundaries. We use those puzzle pieces within this process to develop alternatives for the redistricting options. We also consider future schools. So we'll be looking at not just where schools are today, but also if we're bringing in any additional schools online. As I mentioned previously, how many times a neighborhood has been rezoned is a consideration. So if a new school is coming, we want to take that into account so we're not shifting communities multiple times. Then we gather feedback on our secondary criteria, attendance boundary alternatives, and draft plans. This is the process the community will be a part of as we go forward in this fall's closure, consolidation, and redistricting process. Community engagement is an important aspect of the redistricting process. Every meeting will begin with a presentation, and all presentations will contain the same information. We will start in a larger group, and after the group presentation, we will break you into small groups with a trained facilitator who will work with the group to collect concerns and feedback and share them back with staff. The second and third meetings will be just a little bit different than the first meeting. We do this process whether redistricting elementary, middle, or high schools, or whether we're in any 3 regions in the district. It gives everyone an equal voice and equity in the process. Small communities are heard in the same way that larger communities are. Everyone has an equal voice, and we keep all of our feedback focused solely on the criteria. The focus of the meetings is solely on the criteria. For example, anything related to race or ethnicity is federally prohibited and will not be collected as a comment during the process. The board has not indicated that we should look at home values or if you provide a comment related to changing school impacts home values, our facilitators would not take those comments. Only comments that are directly related to what the board has identified as important when setting attendance boundaries will be considered. Our facilitators are normally the district's assistant principals, counselors, and social workers who are objective participants. They have no vested interest in the process, and they are only there to gather your feedback. They will only consider input related to the criteria. We are committed to receiving and considering all appropriate feedback during this process. Keep in mind that one community may have a pro, another community may have a con. So we must balance multiple perspectives and take that into account based on the criteria that the board has defined as important. When you're in small group discussions, we ask that you respect others' opinions that differ from yours and allow others to speak and share their feedback. The meeting agendas at each meeting will have a QR code where you can submit your questions. Study area maps only will be presented at the first meeting. There are no redistricting options presented at the first meeting. After the general presentation, we break out into small groups and the discussion will be based on the criteria. If you cannot attend the in-person meetings, we have provided an opportunity for you to be engaged in the process. Parents will be able to go to the district's website and answer the same questions, and their feedback will be considered in the process. At the round 1 meeting, specific questions will be asked in the small group facilitated session. The first question provides an opportunity for you to express your concerns and give feedback about the potential school closure, followed by the second closure question, which asks what an ideal use of the facility or property would be if the school closed. In terms of factors such as natural geographic barriers, homeowners associations, shared amenities, common areas, youth teams, or events, what neighborhood should remain together and why? The why is important. You can't just say neighborhood and the neighborhood next door belongs together. What is the why? The why would be we share a collective Boy Scout group or we share a similar swim or tennis community. We would need to know what connects you to that other community. Traffic concerns. What type of concerns do you have that may impact the safe and timely transportation of students to and from school, such as left turn lanes, railroad crossings, and the walkability of communities are all important factors. Please share that information during the discussions. The final question, are there any residential development trends or developments in an area that may impact future school enrollment? We work very closely with our municipal partners, but you live in the community and you may hear about an apartment complex closing or a new single-family subdivision that is under construction. We check department data in the region as well. We want to know what you know about your area that may impact school enrollment. After we gather your feedback in round one, we will analyze the comments and online feedback, and we will develop plans for round two. There is a redistricting administrative committee, which is comprised of our operations leaders, transportation, academic, ESOL, and special education staff, and zone superintendents, who work collaboratively to develop the maps and the plans using all the criteria and feedback that is received. Community feedback can be received at the in-person and online, can be received at the in-person meetings and online, but there is a difference. All comments are considered in the process. The comments at the community meetings are collected by trained facilitators. We will only take appropriate feedback that has been vetted and that are related to the criteria. Those comments will be published on our redistricting website. We also geocode and analyze the comments and provide them to the board. While we hope parents and community members' online comments are directly related to the criteria, however, sometimes they are not. We will not screen or filter those comments, and they will not be published. We will geocode and analyze the comments. Often online comments are duplicates, form letters, and emails, and will count as one. Online comments are counted as one because we want to give equal voice to neighborhoods. For example, let's say you had a neighborhood that only had 5 homes versus a larger neighborhood that had several hundred homes. We want to weigh and evaluate comments, how they are related to the criteria, not how many comments we receive in general. It's not a voting process. One comment that is more related to the criteria can outweigh a form letter that is received 500 times. Oftentimes, people will ask or say, I didn't see my online comment. We do not collect and share them with we do collect and share them with the board, but we do not publish those specific comments. Here is an example of comment mapping. This is from a very old redistricting. We mapped out every single comment based on the criteria. So as the administrative review team considers options, we can see where the concerns are and the community comments are generated from. We will code them as we go through the process for pros and cons and share them with the committee as they develop plans. Again, this is an image from a previous redistricting just to show how we collect and code the collected comments. After round one, we will come back to the community in round two. This is when the maps are unveiled. We will present 3 alternative maps, data tables, and feeder patterns. We will then break you into small groups to ask, what do you like and do not like about the maps based on the board approved criteria? Again, we will have an online form that will start on the day of the meeting and it will conclude at midnight, 3 days after the meeting. Here's an example of a map that would be presented. The black lines show the existing boundary and the change in color shows the plan for this alternative plan. This is an old map from a previous redistricting, just to give you an example. We then provide a table that will show Plan A based on the changes that coincide with the map and what the data now looks like. All the data elements will be provided as a part of the 2 rounds of redistricting where maps will be presented. We will provide the current year and 3 years of enrollment projections. Keep in mind, we look at existing students as well as future students and how these changes will impact communities and schools moving forward for the next 3 years. And this is an example of a data table. After round 2, we'll take your feedback, analyze those comments, and develop one draft plan and one map to be presented at round 3. In round 3, we will provide one map, data tables, and feeder patterns. We will break you into small groups after the general presentation and ask you again, what do you like about this map and what do you not like about the map? You will provide feedback again based on the board approved criteria. Like the previous meetings, an online form will be available for those who cannot be a part of the in-person meetings. After round 3, we will review your comments and your feedback, and we will develop a final recommendation. Parents and communities will ask, when will I know if I will be impacted by redistricting? If you have not been a part of any change that was presented in round 2 or round 3, then you are safe. If you have been in a plan in round 2 or 3, but you were taken from round 3, you could come back in the final recommendation. Round 3 is the only point at which a community could consider itself not impacted by redistricting. We will present the final recommendation to the board on January 14th of 2025. I have not mentioned the Board of Education prior to this point because they have charged staff with engaging the community and developing the redistricting plan. The board will not be engaged in the process until the final recommendation is presented at the board meeting in January. At that point, the board will receive community comments and feedback. Final action by the board will take place on February 20th of 2025. Any approved attendance zone changes will go into effect in August of 2025. Students and families impacted by redistricting will be notified in late March of 2025. We also have a part of the board policy, that's centered around grandfathering. In the 2025 school year, if an elementary student who's in their highest grade, so they will be a rising 4th grader, if they are to be impacted by redistricting, they will have an option to remain at their current school. However, the parents must provide transportation. Grandfathered students, transportation is not provided. Everything related to redistricting is included on our redistricting website. It's a wonderful source of information. If you cannot be a part of the in-person meetings, you can stay engaged and participate through the online option. All the plans, maps, and data elements will be posted on the redistricting website. Frequently asked questions and redistricting informative flyers are also posted on the website. You can scan this QR code or go to fultonschools.org/redistricting. Community forums are set for October, November, and December to explain the rationale and involve stakeholders in drawing potential new attendance zones, as well as adjusting the attendance boundaries of neighboring schools to balance enrollment. We value your feedback and encourage you to attend the forums. Remember, if you cannot attend the in-person meetings, you can provide feedback through our online option. Thank you for participating in Redistricting 101. That concludes my presentation. If you need any translation of this presentation, here is a resource to get this presentation translated. Again, thank you for your attention, and we will take a few questions.
Thank you, Tarika. This is Susan Romanek again, and just as a reminder, this is, as she mentioned, this is not your only opportunity to be involved, so please stay engaged. She did share that website. We will share it again at www.fultonschools.org/redistricting. And as a reminder,
maybe
I'm sorry.
What
Oh, continue. I'm sorry. Is someone speaking? Is someone asking a question? I'll tell you what, let's have a process here. If you have a question, if you wouldn't mind using the raise your hand feature on Microsoft, then we can unmute you and allow you to ask your question.
Si usted tiene alguna pregunta, levante la mano en Microsoft y nosotros vamos a poder responderla para ustedes.
This peaks, I see a question from a Jason Bellamy.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. So there are a couple of questions and they've been put in the chat, and I think they kind of go hand in hand, and it's just understanding the process, because I understand that's what this call is about. Was, I guess, at the beginning of this presentation, you listed 4 different criteria for rezoning. And I think, you know, the closure of Spalding and Parkland is the main topic, but there was also that last one, which was balancing the zones, which I just wanted to understand. I know we're at the point where we're discussing redistricting for the closures of schools, but how did we bypass the process of potentially redistricting to balance our elementary enrollment around this area? And then the second part of that is there was also a question about going forward, the presentation of the redistricting maps, and would there be, knowing that the board is going to vote in the future on the closure of their schools, will there be multiple options? One, with the closure of the schools, but also will there be any possible maps that will be shown that show the non-closure of the schools, and in the situation that the board votes to not close either school?
Okay, I think I understand what you're asking. So for your first question, a part of the consideration for closure, consolidation, and redistricting, as a result of the potential closure of Park Lane and Spalding Drive elementary schools, the process does include balancing enrollment. One of the reasons why the 2 schools are up for consideration for closure is due to under enrollment. So during the redistricting process, we will look at neighboring schools as far as their enrollment and available classroom space, and then use this as an opportunity to balance enrollment as a result of the potential closures of those 2 schools. So that will be a part of the process. I hope I answered your question.
We have a question.
In the second part, I think he was asking about will there be options presented at the meeting if the board chooses not to go forward with the redistricting. And during the redistricting meetings, what would be under consideration is the closure of Park Lane and Spalding Drive. And so what would be presented would be the actual movement of students to other schools, neighboring schools that have available space. So there wouldn't be any other plans presented at the meeting besides the three alternative plans of what that would look like if Spalding Drive and Park Lane closes. And I'm not sure, no, you have a.
That pretty
Anything
much
to
answered
add?
my question. I guess the first part was I was just curious if there was a part of this process that would have occurred before making that determination or recommendation to close a school, that possibly rebalancing the enrollment such that a school would not need to be, that wouldn't need to be an option.
The redistricting process is the process that balance enrollment.
Sorry, but it seems like the redistricting process, as you're talking about it, would balance enrollment minus Park Lane or Spalding Drive, not if Park Lane or Spalding Drive was not voted to be closed. So
Drake, let me,
is there
I'm
a
sorry,
balance if one or both of those schools does not get closed? Is there also a rebalancing then? I think that was kind
yeah,
of
I think the answer to the question goes hand in hand.
right.
It is a process that we go through that's not just a redistricting. It's a process that also considers the closure. You have to take the entire planning region and look at the entire planning region. And across the planning region, we have excess capacity. So part of closure, it gets triggered by the size of the school and the enrollment. The other part of it is the entire planning region and the space. So it's a hand-in-hand process. It's not a one instead of the other. And that's part of why we have the input. That's part of why we have initial recommendations of schools to look at. And it all goes together in this process. So I hope that answers the question, but it's not a either or, it's an and.
But the map that gets presented, the round 3 map that gets presented is solely a map based on a reduction in the number of schools, not two possibilities of this is how it looks if we reduce and this is how it looks if we don't.
Yeah, so there's multiple options throughout the process of what things look like. But to your point, staff has made a recommendation based on the criteria that are put out by the board to look at closure at 2 different schools. The maps will include those closures on it, and if there is different direction from the Board of Education, then we will certainly follow suit.
So then at that point, you go back to the drawing board and you redraw based on what the board votes on, which is different than the recommendation?
That could happen, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to remind everyone, we do have some hands raised, so I'd like to go in the order of them to give them their opportunity. Thank you for waiting patiently. We've got Raymond Grote and followed by Alina Conley and JW. So we could start with Raymond, please.
You're on mute, sir.
Thank you. Apologize about that. Tarika, thank you for the presentation. Something that struck me as a little surprising, not a little, a lot surprising, is that the schools that are proposed for closure are not going to be included in the list of open enrollment schools. It looks like that decision hasn't been made yet. When would that decision be made?
The decision will be made once the board makes the final, if they approve the redistricting. Because that's board policy. So if a school is impacted by redistricting, then they would not be on the open enrollment, would not be eligible for open enrollment. So until the plan is approved, then we'll know how to move forward, what schools will be, if any of the impacted schools will be on the list.
Okay, can I say that back to you to make sure I understood it? So what I'm hearing is the open enrollment list is going to include the schools that are subject to closure or subject to the recommendation of closure by you all. And then nothing would happen with that list. Those schools wouldn't be removed from that list until after the board votes sometime February 20th, give or take.
Say it one more time, make sure I understood you what you said. Say it again.
Yeah, well, let me back up. When does the open enrollment start and end?
Our open enrollment process, we started a new process, so we're anticipating our open enrollment application window to open in December.
Got it. And so
It's
from
no-
December through February 20th, there's two schools that are subject to closure or subject to the recommendation of closure will be on the list of open enrollment schools until the board votes one way or another on the redistricting plan, correct?
Yes, I think that would be the way we would handle that. Yeah.
Okay. Can we get confirmation of that? Because that's a very different discussion that we need to have with board members if the decision is made to remove these schools.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Conley, please, followed by JW and Rebecca Friedman.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. So I just want us to get clarity around the process for community input when it comes to things outside of the qualifiers for redistricting. So you gave us the criteria in terms of what you would consider for what we think makes sense if we were to redistrict, right? So traffic, if we shared a pool, we shared Cub Scouts, but where do we provide community input as to why we do not think the school should be closed? And what do you consider as plausible causes as to why, even with under enrollment, a school would stay open? And if that is even part of the process, because based on what we've seen, it seems like right now, all of the redistricting that we're being a part of is just having a voice on what happens when it does get redistricted. So I'm just trying to understand what efforts do get made on our end and what gets actually, what matters. Like, what do you all consider to be worthy of considering based on the data?
So at the first meeting, when you break into the small facilitated sessions, those questions that I showed, I think it was 5 questions that I showed, you will have a discussion in the small groups around the closure, share your input and give feedback on the closure of the schools, as well as if the school does close, what would be an ideal use of the building and the property. So you'll have those discussions as well as, traffic, do you share common amenities? So those discussions will happen at the first meeting with the facilitator. And then after that meeting, we get those comments and that feedback, and we use it to produce the 3 alternative maps that we will bring to the third round of the third round meeting, a second round meeting. And then there will be further discussion around the boundaries that we've presented in the maps. And then you'll be in those sessions again, discussing the actual maps, giving feedback and giving input. And then we will get those comments, and then we'll come back to the third meeting, and we'll have one map, and that will be the recommended map that we will present to the board. So at those meetings is when you'll have that opportunity to provide specific input in those small group settings with the facilitator.
And just to be clear, you specified things like property value, race, academics. Those things are not taken into account.
Yes.
So if I said top performing school, that will go in one ear and out the other, correct? I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
It'll be listed as a comment, but it's not a part of the criteria. So race, ethnicity, home values, those things are not considered. but they will be taken as a comment and presented to the board.
So may I jump in for a second? So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ingrid Huff. I'm the Deputy Chief Operations Officer. So Ms. Conley, we will not accept those comments. So anything not related to the criteria that the board has defined, so socioeconomics, academics, those are out of scope. So right now we're in a process of going through objective data to develop alternatives for an attendance boundary. The subjective comments related to anything, some of them are prohibited by federal law. We will not take those comments. And because we're in a process of collecting feedback solely for the purpose of developing an option based on the direction given to the board. So that information will not be collected through redistricting. If you have a concern regarding academics or anything else, you can provide that in an email to the planning inbox. It will not be considered for redistricting. However, we will share all the emails that we've received with the Board of Education. So facilitators cannot take feedback on anything not identified in those criteria. So traffic patterns, safety, multiple rezonings, that information we can collect, but anything else outside of those specific questions, we cannot.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If we could turn it over to JW, followed by Rebecca Friedman and Jessica Wetzel.
Hi, are you taking school-specific questions at this meeting? So Hertz Ferry, for example?
Ms. Peaks, I'll let you answer that.
Are we taking school-specific questions?
But my question was related to Hertz Ferry. I didn't know if that's a second round question or if you can answer. I'm just puzzled as to why Hertz Ferry is included in this conversation. Spalding is about 5 miles north. So I didn't know if the consideration was kids who are enrolled at Spalding might be added to Hertz Ferry, or if as part of this overall plan, you're considering moving kids from Hertz Ferry to either Lake Forest or High Point.
For redistricting, we typically just have a broad scope. So we invite neighboring schools to participate in the process. So if you attend the meetings, then your input and your feedback can be shared at that particular meeting. But we don't go into the meetings with an idea of where students will be moved specifically. So that's when we gather the comments and the feedback from the community and we develop the plans.
I guess more broadly than what I'm asking is every kid who's enrolled in an elementary school on your list right now, I think those 6 impacted schools, theoretically, could each of them get moved to a different some version other than the rising 4th graders you mentioned?
So
Ingrid,
I mean, is
I-
it just an open free fall of
Yeah.
movement? Is that?
So let me help just a little bit. So the board has criteria, primary being geographic proximity. So if you think about that, the locations of schools and families and communities may change in perspective to what your closest school is based on available space once one of those schools is removed. Now, we attempt to be as minimally disruptive as possible when we go through a redistricting. So we don't try to shuffle everyone around. However, we do have to keep in mind that if geographic proximity is the primary criteria, if a school is no longer there, we may have to shift families. So that's why we keep the scope broad to include the entire region as we look at attendance boundaries. But we don't want to take anyone off the table or not consider or tell a school you're not included and you actually might be moved. So again, follow the process, come to the meetings. You can attend them in person or online, but we don't want to exclude or make people feel that we're not considering their particular school attendance boundary when it may come into play.
Real quick follow-up. Is there any consideration of making Spalding a 6th grade academy like they did in City of Atlanta with Sutton, or is everything on the table there?
So for now, that's not within the scope that we're reviewing. We certainly have space at our middle school, so that's not within the criteria or what the board has directed us to review.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Friedman, you're up.
Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity here to ask our questions. My question sort of goes twofold. I heard years ago Spalding Drive actually was over capacity. We had trailers, we were rezoned, and we were given relief. Is that being taken into consideration that Fulton County Schools actually diminished our population and rezoned it, I think, to Woodland and some others, with actually opening schools as well? Given that a lot of the neighbors and families are actually closer to Woodland Elementary, which is actually now overpopulated, is that being taken into consideration of having some of those students at Woodland rezoned to Spalding to offer them the opportunity to go to our school?
During this process, the options, all the schools that will be impacted will be considered as far as long as the schools have space, available classroom and space, then it could be opportunities to move students to any of the neighboring schools as long as it meets the board approved criteria. I wasn't here, I'm not able to answer this question about previous redistricting that may have happened at Woodland or Spalding. I can't answer that question.
I'll speak to that. So, Ms. Friedman, the last time we rezoned this area, I believe, was when Lake Forest opened, and then Ison followed. And so that's been quite some time. And I see questions in the chat about space and academics. The formula that she walked you through in regards to the classroom allocation model is how space for this process is defined. So not just the state capacity, it is how many teachers and classrooms are required for the programmatic needs of students. So when we opened those schools, Ison, Lake Forest, it was to relieve overcrowding of the schools that were existing. As this area, and speaking specifically to Sandy Springs, some of this happened in East Point because I can't tell who's on the call. The communities have redeveloped. So some of them have been gentrified. Some of them apartments have come offline. Communities have stabilized and they're not yielding additional students. Development has slowed. There are multiple factors that have occurred over that last, let's say, 10 years. As a result, the populations in some schools is lower than others. And so as we contemplate what options to use to develop what communities could potentially move in various alternatives, we will look at the schools, the spaces that they have, and where these communities can shift. So whomever moved potentially or is more proximate to Woodland that's in the Spalding boundary, they could end up in the alternative plans to go to Woodland. They could end up going to Lake Forest or Ison or Hertz Ferry. We'll just have to go through the various scenarios as we go through the meetings over the next 3 months and see how the plans evolve.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we'll hear from, I believe it's Jessica Wetzel and Jen Lott. And following that, oh, sorry, please go ahead.
My question was already answered, so I'm good.
Jen Lott, are you next?
Yes, hi, thank you. I just wanted to circle back to the discussion from a few minutes ago about the open enrollment status, specifically of Spalding. So I emailed Dr. Looney on September 18th with this exact question because I wanted confirmation from him as to whether Spalding would be given the chance to have open enrollment. And his response was that he fully expects that Spalding will be eligible for open enrollment, but the mention earlier in this chat seemed to be that that wasn't decided yet, but I'm hoping that his response means it is going to be offered, and I'd just love to know a clearer answer to that, I guess.
I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Peaks?
Yeah, Ms. Peaks or Ms. Huff?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. My response would be based on, board policy. The policy states that if if the school is to be impacted by, redistricting, it will not be on the open enrollment list.
That's just
board
exactly
policy.
opposite of what he told me. I specifically said, I will read you the email. The
No.
email he wrote back to me says, the board has not decided to close Spalding Drive at this point. The list of open enrolled schools will be made available this fall. And given that Spalding Drive is under enrolled, I fully expect for the school to be listed as an option.
So Ms.
So-
Lott, I'm sorry, if I can jump in for a second. So the list will contemplate schools as they are based on their current attendance boundaries. So what Ms. Peaks said is correct, but it's also correct what Dr. Looney is saying. So what we will do is offer open enrollment for every school that has an enrollment projection. So parents will apply in December, January timeframe. Should the school and should the recommendation go forward and the board decides to close that school in February, for parents who have chosen one of those schools, there should be a ranking when you apply for open enrollment. So if you choose, let's say, for example, Park Lane as your first choice, and that school is slated for closure in 25-26, if there's space at your second choice, you would get placed at your second choice versus your first choice. So what I always tell parents in this option, always apply and keep your options open. Don't wait to see how boundaries, how they settle or where they end up. Apply for open enrollment as if the school is open. And then if it's not, then we will offer you your second choice if there's space. Does that help? I can't, you're on mute.
I know I wasn't talking yet. I was thinking.
Okay.
I mean, it helps. It's just that I feel that, and full disclosure, my kids are in high school, so I don't have children that will be affected by this directly. But I feel that if Spalding being under enrolled is in this discussion point for closure, there should be a chance for the families in our community to be able to have other students from the area who want to apply for open enrollment. Since there is room and it's not voted on yet, they should get the chance to apply. And if the vote goes differently, then they'd have to make other arrangements. But it just seems that it would be a possible solution that we need as a community the chance to get to succeed at before not. And which is what Dr. Looney, the way he responded to me is.
So keep in mind yes, ma'am. So keep in mind that we have two different metrics for space. And so again, Ms. Peaks walked you through the classroom allocation model, which counts teachers, programs, and needs based on enrollment. State capacity counts is a different calculation. So open enrollment will be based on state capacity. This model will be based on the classroom allocation model. So for you, I guess that's really knowing the nuances of both calculations, but we will allow Spalding Drive, because it is below state capacity, to be a part of open enrollment prior to the board's decision on closure. As well as Park Lane, if it meets that criteria. So forecasts have to be updated for us to make that determination, which will be in December. But if it falls below that number within the percentage of 95% of capacity, then it would be on the list. Okay? All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Next up, we have Melissa Draw, I'm maybe saying it incorrectly, and Ms. Wiseman.
Hi, yes, this is Melissa Dre. Thank you for answering these questions. I know that you mentioned that you account for special programs in the consideration for redistricting, how do you determine and ensure that the same programs are available for the students that need them at their current school would be available at the school they're redistricted for? For example, if they are in a special education program or TAG, how is it ensured that they will also have those available where they're redistricted?
The programs, if the specialized programs, they will find space at schools that have the space to accommodate those programs. So none of the programs would be missed. That's part of the redistricting process as well. We have on our administrative review team that I mentioned, we have members from ESOL, special education, and academics a part of that team. So we look at those programs at those schools, and we allocate those programs at other schools to be able to come.
Programs will remain and those won't be collapsed, but do the students that are currently in them follow those programs? Are those programs available at every school, I guess, or how do you determine that the students that are currently in need of those will also have them available at their new school if they're redistricted?
Ingrid, you want to help with that question, please?
Sure. So as a part of the administrative review process, so there is a team that reviews attendance boundary options as we develop them. That team consists of special education, academics, pre-K, ESOL. So as we move students, the programs will follow the students. So let's take, for example, and every school has TAG, so TAG would not be a question. The number of TAG students would determine the allotment of TAG teachers. So, but if there is let's say a special needs kindergarten or pre-K class at a specific school, as we go through the process of potential closure, special education will identify what's the closest school for those students, and that they will then identify another center, because some of our programs are center-based, so that means they serve multiple communities. We'll identify where is their space in proximity to where the students live. We may help them identify a site for that program, or if there is an additional need within a school to expand an existing program, we will help them with those space needs as well. Did that answer your question?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Weissman, followed by Stephen Bell and Shelley.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
I'm sorry, Ms. Weissman, I'm having a little difficulty hearing you. Are you able to boost your volume?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's a little better. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was saying thank you for the presentation, Ms. P, and also thank you, Ms. Huff, for the clarity. My question is, with the Fulton redistricting, will that affect our magnet programs anyway because of the transportation the students may need?
So I think I heard you ask if the programs will affect magnet transportation. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we are only looking at elementary schools for this potential redistricting consolidation. And to my knowledge, I don't believe we have any type of magnet transportation for those students. I don't believe we have magnet programs for elementary schools and students that are being transported for magnet. So this process would not have any implications for middle, or I think only high schools are transported. This would not impact high schools. Now, there are some additional maybe discussions with open enrollment moving forward in the fall, but it has no bearing or no attachment to this process.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bell and Shelley.
Hey
Hi.
there.
Oh,
Thank you for
letting us ask some questions on this matter. So I have a couple of points of the question. So the classroom allocation model, per your comment earlier, Ms. Huff, is different than the state level capacity. I've seen the state level capacity information. Is the classroom allocation by school available online? I don't know where to find that, just to see what the reference data is. And,
Yes.
and related to that is, I'll get all the questions out so I can give my time back to the rest of the squad. So related to the classroom allocation model, I'm curious why or what related to the open enrollment, why Spalding wasn't listed for open enrollment for the last few years, whereas other schools that were closer to full capacity, like Hertz Ferry, were listed for open enrollment, and why a school like Woodland has a number of students in temporary trailers or educational units that have been there, it looks like 6-7 years at this point, why the open enrollment wasn't viewed as an option to give students from that school a chance to slide over into Spalding so that those students could be given a permanent classroom.
Okay, so the classroom allocation model is available. So if you go to the board docs and go back to the March enrollment update, every year when we release the 5-year enrollment projections, there are two numbers for space. One has the school state capacity, and I just talked to the state to understand clearly how state capacity is calculated. State capacity is a Georgia DOE funding measure to count capital outlay, which is a capital reimbursement to the district for classroom space. It's based on the state student teacher funding formula. And it basically takes a classroom and says it can accommodate, let's say, for example, 30 students. It does not take into account if it's a special needs classroom, if it's a tag classroom, if it's an EIP or ESOL classroom, because those classrooms cannot accommodate 30 students. So we have that metric, which Spalding is a considerably smaller school. I believe the state capacity is 550, and we build our elementary schools now for 850. Some buildings that have had additions may be a little bit larger, like Woodland, I believe, which is a little bit larger as its state capacity. What's important for us in the classroom allocation model is how many classrooms are in each school. By classrooms, we have definitions by square footage. So between 750 to 800 square feet. We also have what we use to calculate a small classroom, which was, I believe, 550 to 750. We count those instructional spaces, and then we count the number of teachers. So when you go to that report, and I think Brennan just put it in the chat, it changes every year based on how many teachers are allocated to each school. So if there are 2 pre-K teachers one year, we would count 2 classrooms. If the program 2 years ago only had 1 pre-K, we would count 1 classroom. If there's a larger population of special needs students one year versus another, we would count the actual number of teachers that are required. So the report shows you in there how many classrooms. So it'll say classroom 0 or -2 or 1. So a negative number means the school should have an excess of classrooms using that model. If it has a positive number, it means that a school should have a need for additional classrooms beyond the building. Now, I want to clarify that this is a formula that normalizes every school across the district. Principals have the flexibility and autonomy to deliver instruction as they see fit within their building, should they have space. For example, our model, and we work with academics to define what good looks like. They will tell us for an EIP or a remedial class that for every 3 teachers, there should be 1 classroom of dedicated space, because they encourage a push-in model where the remedial teacher goes in to co-teach with the general ed general ed teacher. But if a principal has space, what we will often find is every EIP teacher has a designated space. So again, this is the optimal formula based on the definitions provided by academics for efficiency on classroom utilization. So it will change every year based on the programmatic needs of students in buildings, but it is on that enrollment report that's been shared. And you can go back and look over the years. So every March, that presentation is always provided, and that PDF is also attached to it.
Can I ask a follow-up real quick before you jump in, Shelley, if you don't mind? So the recommendation to close, as it was explained by Mr. Maloof last week or 2 weeks ago, was related to the Georgia capacity versus actual enrollment. So the shortfall of the excess capacity in the cluster. And at Spalding, at Ison, at Woodland, and basically everybody had excess capacity in the building based on the state level data. But the classroom allocation is more granular to say that how the classrooms are actually being utilized is what the current capacity of that school is. And so Woodland appears to have excess students versus their actual current capacity based on your classroom allocation, because there have been temporary educational units there for the last 8 years, 10 years. So is it the classroom allocation that's how you determine whether we're under or over utilization, or is it the state level? Because those are very different things based on your explanation.
They are very different. So, and I'm trying to pull it up. So on the data table that was presented this month to the board, it showed an aggregate of the region's enrollment, their state capacity, their classroom utilization by the region. That is the data that was used to determine if we take a building out of inventory, can we close a school? Is there enough space? So in the case in Sandy Springs, we would look at how many instructional units are being utilized at Spalding. So I believe the building has 38 classrooms. When she walks you through that model, it said 9 constants. So every school has 9 constants. So in reality, there are 27 classrooms in that building that are being used as program and general education space. We would look across the region to say, do we have at least 29 classrooms in this region that could accommodate the students currently at Spalding Drive? It was not the state capacity number that's used, again, because when we redistrict, we're going to use the classroom allocation numbers, not state capacity to fill schools. So he may have misspoke in that regard, but it is the classroom allocation model that determines how many classrooms are needed to meet the instructional needs of students for general ed as well as their individual programs, be it TAG, ESOL, special ed. So just giving that clarification.
I appreciate that. And then the open enrollment portion of the question, I know I asked a lot. Why, if there is underutilization at Spalding, why we wouldn't have been there for open enrollment prior?
Gotcha. So,
and then Shelley, it's all yours. I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry. We'll get there, Shelley. So prior to this year, the board adopted a new policy called change of school assignment and redefined space. So space for open enrollment based on the board's approval is now looking at 95% of state capacity. The policy previously, and I don't think you can go back retroactively and see the old policy. The old policy said a school had to have 2 or more classrooms of available space using the classroom allocation model. So in the instance of Spalding, I believe they're at capacity using this model. Spalding would not qualify under the old policy. So the definition changed with the passage of the new policy. The new policy, again, is 95% of state capacity. The old policy that had been in place, I believe, since 2005 was 2 or more classrooms of available space, or maybe 2009, but it's been in place for quite some time. But it was defined as 2 or more classrooms of available space based on the classroom allocation model.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Go, Shelley.
Hi. Okay, so I'm a parent of 3 kids at Hertz Ferry Elementary. I just moved here from out of state, so I'm getting caught up on some of the bigger pieces of the framework that you all have discussed today. My 3 kids are all special needs, and a redistricting for them would set them back years from the progress that we've made. And so I know we've talked a little bit about open enrollment and IEP and all those things, but like, you know, as a parent who's looking at this as not just like, oh, it'll take a month for my kids to settle into this new environment. I mean, like, it's going to be detrimental to them for a long period of time. What are my options within this? What do I do? I guess question.
So Shelley, let me just kind of walk you through. So first, understand nothing's set in stone. So we're going through a process. Let's go to March, and your home is impacted by redistricting. So I don't know if you live in the Hertz Ferry zone or if you're at Hertz Ferry based on a center placement. Now, if your home is moved, but special education does not move your children's program placement, you would not be affected. If you were, they would let you know. And this is relative to anyone on the call. Keep in mind that we also have various transfer options. So open enrollment would supersede a placement. So if you are moved and you apply and you're placed by lottery, you still could go to the school that you apply for. But for the program, it would be contingent upon special ed, moving programs versus your home being rezoned. So your home could be rezoned and you not move at all if they're in a specialized program that is placed in a specific school. So when we go through notifications of families, there are various categories that we have to ensure that everybody meets whatever parameters or conditions. Everyone won't be affected at the same level because of program placement. So that would be a kind of follow the process, but still, if they have IEPs that places them within a special feeder for special education, that may or may not change. That we won't know. But again, special education is included in the administrative review team process, and they will certainly guide us in that. And the final recommendation will delineate what programs will stay and what programs will go.
Okay, and then just so the nuance, I don't think I did a good job of calling out, isn't about will my kids stay in a special needs program? There's another woman that mentioned that. It's literally just like that change, like going to a new building. Like
I understand. Yes,
okay, yeah. So it's beyond like.
We no longer have those options for consideration. We do not, what we used to call a hardship transfer. Those flexibilities are no longer available. We have what's called open enrollment. So again, for any parent who thinks their child may have to go through any type of change, I would highly recommend, if you want to opt for another transfer, if you want just to have the opportunity for another school, to go ahead and apply for open enrollment. And if you don't need those transfers, then just don't exercise them. That help?
Okay, I believe our next people are asking questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Michelle, do you have another question?
Oh, no, I just thumbs up, but I didn't know if you saw me. That's helpful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Shanna Ward, followed by Nora Robb, and followed then by Alina Conley one last time. And then I think we'll be at our maximum for today.
Hey, my name's Shanna, and I'm a parent of children at Dunwoody Springs, Sandy Springs, and North Springs. I actually have two questions for you. So the first question regards open enrollment, and we now have on the record that Spalding Drive Elementary will be included in open enrollment. My follow-up question to that is, will the number of Fulton County students that request to attend Spalding Drive Elementary in the 25 to 26 school year be factored into the decision to either keep Spalding Drive open or close it? I ask this question because the CCRPI scores for Spalding Drive are high. Therefore, I anticipate that many parents will consider transferring their children there during open enrollment.
Ingrid, would you mind answering that question, please?
No, I'm sorry, Shanna. So I guess
You want
you're
me to-
asking, will open enrollment, will Spalding Drive be considered the number of students who apply?
Right,
So the recommendation will be made to the board in January. We will be able to provide them the number of students who have applied, but keep in mind, it will, let me finish. So
I wanted
where
to
there is
clarify
a,
a point, please. I wanted to
okay, go
clarify
ahead.
one point. The reason I asked this question is because Spalding Drive is being considered, the closing is being considered because of decreased enrollment. So that could positively impact their enrollment. And if it does, and it reaches capacity with the open enrollment, that could be a game changer for the community.
So Ms. Ward, again, for open enrollment, we have two different metrics here. Again, we have state capacity and we have classroom allocation.
Right.
Based on our model, we'd have to calculate where the students are coming from and where they're going to. So if they're coming from other areas outside of Sandy Springs, we would need to provide that information to the board. If they're coming from Sandy Springs, we'll have to provide that information to the board as well. But another thing I want you to contemplate or consider as we made this recommendation, I specifically said one criteria does not stand alone. So enrollment coupled with facility condition and is there available space in the area? So it's not just enrollment that is driving the potential closure of these schools. It's all three things. So the point is, I would need to know where the kids are coming from that have applied, because if it's outside of the region, that's one factor. But if it's from Sandy Springs, we're shuffling enrollment, but we have the same capacity. The number doesn't change. So the numerator would change, but the denominator would not. So again, we won't make those decisions. The board will. We will provide that information to them in the context of these numbers are not considered in the closure recommendation. Because when we develop the maps, we will have enrollment projections based on each scenario. If there is a plus and minus, and keep in mind, we'll have to figure that out because the pieces are moving contingent upon where the residents are. In that final recommendation, we'll have to say from this community that we've identified for potential shift to another boundary or impacted by the closure, these students have opted to go somewhere else. So we'll have to be that granular with them. But again, the denominator won't change, only the numerator.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. That's clear. You're essentially telling me it will involve building condition. So I did look up the building condition. It is listed as fair. It will involve school enrollment. And what I'm hearing with the numerator and the denominator is based on geographic region, you may or may not take into account the students that sign up for Spalding Drive Elementary in the open enrollment process. Is that correct?
So in the redistricting closure, we will not. We will provide that information supplementally to the board as a part of the recommendation.
Understood. I have one follow-up question also.
Okay.
As we transition into open enrollment, I know it's going to be a big change for all of us and a lot of work. Prior to open enrollment, we had a hardship process. As a taxpayer and a Fulton County Schools parent, I'm personally curious about how many children and parents applied to be hardshipped into SDE last year or applied to the pre-K program, and is that information public record? If it is public record, how do I obtain it?
You would have to submit an open records request. The count would be available.
Okay, thank you so much. That was all.
You're welcome.
Appreciate your time.
Sure.
Okay, we have two final questions. We're already starting to go over time. Ingrid and Tarika, would you like to take these last two questions and then we will call it a meeting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, that will be Nora Robb followed by Lena Conley.
Hey, thank you for answering our questions. And I know it's been a long meeting. I have a lot of questions, so I tried to narrow it down to two, and certainly can follow up with some later. I'm going to ask them both at the same time because they play on one another. My first question is why the criteria in regards to classroom allocation was changed this year in terms of changing the criteria for school closure, and why, when we knew we had open enrollment coming down the pipeline that could result potentially in enrollment in Sandy Springs schools that would exceed capacity should a school be closed at all, why we even considered making these recommendations this year as opposed to waiting for after a year had gone by with the school choice open enrollment, because it seems like those are two things: a changed criteria and then a changed open enrollment process. And it seems a bit premature to make a recommendation on school closing when those two processes may dictate that we don't need one at all, particularly given there are many facilities in the Sandy Springs region that are ranked the same. And then my follow-up question is, what resources, if a school is closed, which I think a couple of times on this call we've sort of said a school is closing as opposed to potential closure, so I'd like to re-stress that. If a school is closed, what resources will be put into these schools that, while academics are not a criteria in school closure, they should be a criteria in schools that remain open. And I would like to understand what the plan is in terms of improving academics, particularly in the area of closing the gap, which Spalding was #1 in. So taking students that needed additional academic help and helping close that gap. If you can start to tell us what you might be doing to do that.
Okay, so I think you asked 3 questions. I'll try to remember them all. But if not, I'll circle back around. So the board made the decision to adjust from the classroom need to a percentage of state capacity. I can't really speak to why, but I will say that that decision for the classroom allocation model, we use that metric for elementary and middle because it is so program dependent. We use state capacity for high school. I think they wanted one consistent number, so they used a percentage that they felt would align to the classroom allocation model. In some schools it does, in some schools it does not, but they felt it was generic enough of a calculation that it would encompass enough space to address the open enrollment applicants. I will say, though, we've had open enrollment in Fulton County since House Bill 251, for those of you who are familiar, and that's been quite some time. I can't remember the year, but it was the early 2000s. Throughout Fulton County, we have 59 elementaries, I believe. there are less than 10 who have not participated in open enrollment over the last few years, simply because we have a declining population at elementary school. So we've had numerous schools that have been available for that option. Over those years, we have never had an exorbitant amount of open enrollment requests for schools, whether they're on open enrollment, whether they're high achieving. Families typically like their home school, their neighborhood school, and they have elected to not enroll or not participate at high numbers. Now, I can't predict what would have happened or what will happen, but what I will say is over the last few years, students traditionally have not opted for open enrollment at high numbers. So we didn't feel that this would have a significant impact. Also, due to the limited options, so open enrollment does not come with transportation, which is often a consideration for families who want to go outside of their neighborhood zone. So again, that may play into the decision-making process. So we've not had really high numbers. I don't think it was intentional to consider a closure around the open enrollment option that we've now added. Keep in mind, again, I will say the denominator will not change unless the students coming from South Fulton into Sandy Springs or Sandy Springs into East Point or North and vice versa. We'd be shifting students within their region is what we typically see for open enrollment. So again, the question is, can the region absorb the enrollment? So I think that speaks to the first two. In regards to academics, I really don't sit on that side of the house, and it wouldn't be fair for me to address that. I will say this past year, we did a closure for S.L. Lewis. That school is being rebuilt on its current site. So we had to close the school and move the students to a couple other schools. There was a domino involved. But teachers who are in existing schools that have closed, they typically are maintained within the region where their students go. For example, if two teachers, there are two classrooms, I believe, of first grade at Park Lane. If that school closes and the students move to a neighboring school, the need for teachers at the neighboring school, unless students move out, that need increases and the teachers follow the students. We have the same curriculum in all of our schools. We do understand that all schools don't perform at the same level. However, their resources are going to follow the student. Oftentimes, the teacher will follow the student. Now, I can't guarantee that. Our HR team has a process by which they place teachers and staff. But what we found in this last redistricting and closure that we just did, the teachers, for the most part, and staff followed those students as they transitioned to a new building.
Thank you for answering my question. I just, I guess I want to reiterate, and it's been reiterated in the chat, that Spalding Drive hasn't been included in open enrollment. So I think it's a little unfair to say that people don't want to go to school outside of their neighborhood school. We certainly don't in the Spalding district, which is why so many of us are here on this call. But I do think it's unfair to make a statement that would suggest that people would not have chosen Spalding over other neighborhood schools due to its high performance when they were not given that choice other than a hardship petition.
Yes, ma'am. And I didn't specify Spalding Drive. I just spoke to, in generalities, what I've seen in regards to the number of parents who've participated in our open enrollment process. So I think we have one more question.
Yes,
Susan.
one last question, then we will close. That is from Ms. Alina Conley.
Okay, I'll make it quick. Just kind of following up on Shelley's point, my huge concern is because I do have special needs children as well, and a move would be diabolical as well. So when you provide us the redistricting data, are you able to give us information on the special needs, like classroom sizes, and so we can determine where our special needs children would go based on the region, or is that not provided per school, or does it change per year? Like what information is available to determine redistricting around special needs programming? And then also, I guess one of the reasons why we chose Spalding was because of the small size. And we know with children with executive functioning, it's hard to kind of be in these huge schools. Can we get like the size of the schools to know if we needed to do the early choice program? I can't remember the name that you mentioned. What schools are smaller? Because I'm not as familiar with the public school system.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm going to try to remember the first part. So class size for special education is, so I guess it depends on the program. So every program has a set class size as defined by special ed. So whether it's pre-K or autism or even TAG is considered special education, there's a set class size. So those class sizes, no matter where the student is, would be maintained, just as would kindergarten through 5th grade. All of those class sizes would remain the same. When we go through the redistricting process, if we're moving a program, for example, I believe Spalding may have special needs pre-K. If they do, and that program is going somewhere else, we would denote that on the table to say SNK, SM pre-K, and denote what those are. Those classrooms are being added to a particular attendance boundary. Those programs are moving in this scenario. Special ed will guide that decision. So that would be the second piece. Class size will remain the same. We will tell you if the program is moving and where it's moving to in each of those. You'll see a map and then you'll see a data table. So that would follow.
So basically, if we get redistricted to Woodland, we could potentially be at another school because we're in special ed.
It depends on what type of service your child has. If it's interrelated, they would probably go to their home school based on their residence. If they're in a special program like autism, which is center-based, that would be based on where special education relocates the program. So it just depends on your child's specific needs. And I wouldn't really want to go into that on the call. You probably could talk to your IST at the school as we go through this, or someone will be a part of this committee for special ed to help us follow that, because we're not the experts there. But if it's interrelated, every school will have interrelated resources in their school. If it's a program class like SNK, SM pre-K, autism, MOID, those classes are served by centers, not at every particular school.
Got it. Okay.
So when you asked about open enrollment, the PDF that was dropped in the chat that has state capacity on it, it has that number determines the size of the building. So if you look at Spalding, I think it's 550. You can look at some of the other schools, which are 850. Some of those schools have by design they're smaller buildings. So that would help you if you're just looking for a small building, if that's one of your personal criteria to consider for open enrollment. You would look at enrollment if you're looking for a school that has a certain population as a barometer for whether you wanted to consider open enrollment at that school for your child. And keep in mind, the numbers that you're looking at today are this current year's forecast. They do not consider any potential school closures, consolidations, rezoning, or changes in the forecast that we will prepare for next year. So that list will be updated when we release the information for open enrollment. It will have some additional information regarding size. Okay. You're welcome.
Well, okay, I think we have run a little bit over time, but I would like to thank everyone for taking time out of your schedules to be with us today. There will be another session at 6 p.m. tonight. We plan on covering the same information, but if you are more than welcome to join again, and sometimes you can hear things with a different light when you hear it a second time. This presentation will be posted to the redistricting web page as a recording. And so please feel free to go and watch that again and to go there as well for more information about the process. If there's anything else with Tarika, Ms. Huff, is there anything that you would like to share before we close out? Oops, let's get you off mute there.
Nope, I think we're good. Thank you, Susan.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'm going to close it out and thank you all for participating.